All right. Welcome, everyone, to the event today at the Kaplan Institute. So glad that you could make it. If you haven't already, feel free to grab pizza, salad to enjoy during the event. Today, I'm super excited to introduce our guest speaker, John List. John is a professor of economics at the University of Chicago and the author of The Voltage Effect, which is what he's going to be talking to us about today. He's developed this idea, which he calls the voltage effect, which is essentially the ability for ideas to be replicated at scale. And he's identified 5 measurable vital signs that he thinks all ideas need to have in order to acquire this voltage effect. So he's going to be sharing that presentation with us so that whether you're an entrepreneur, you work in policy, or any other field, you can develop ideas that have the potential to reach and impact more people. Thank you, and let's give a hand to John List.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming. I wish Raj was here because I was going to say a few nice things about Raj, but now I can't. You might be wondering, why is this guy here? Well, Raj was an old colleague of mine at the University of Central Florida. Raj and I were in business school at the University of Central Florida. So we've both traveled very different paths to get here. But I think his success really outsizes my success in a big way. He's a president of your institute, and your institute is world class. So I want to say thanks a lot for having me. Today I will be talking about the voltage effect, and I'll be talking about scaling. You might not know how I define voltage effect or scaling, and I'll get to that as we walk through the book. But before I walk through the book, I want you to help me, and I want you to be one of my experimental subjects. And I promise you, this is not the first time that you have been one of my experimental subjects. Okay, I will promise you of that, and we can talk about that as we move along here. So here's what I'm going to have you do. This is what I call, let's get some neurons firing. In a few slides, I'm going to have a QR code for you to download and fill out a Google survey. Here's what I'm going to ask you to write down in that survey. You should look around and ask yourself, what number between 1 and 100 will this group's average guess be? And then I want you to multiply that by 3 halves. Okay? Your guess has to be an integer between 1 and 100, inclusive. If you say a number above or below that range, my analyst back at the University of Chicago will throw it out, and it won't count. So if you put infinity, I promise you it won't count. Okay? So I'm an economist at the University of Chicago. I understand incentives. A big reason why a lot of you are here probably is because you get free lunch and a free book. Those are incentives. Here's an incentive to think about your number for my game. Voltage effect swag. Okay, and I promise you the back of this t-shirt is much better than the front. Okay? Now, I've also taught for about 30 years now, and I'm going to let you get a picture of that swag, because that thing that's not available in stores. It's probably a demand side problem, right? Nobody demands it. That's why it's not in stores. But I understand extra credit. And I understand we all like extra credit. So here's your bonus swag opportunity. I want you on that same form, there will be a line that says, what is the equilibrium to this game? Don't fear. If you don't speak economese, what the equilibrium means is once everyone picks this number, no one has an incentive to change. Okay? So think to yourself, once everyone picks this number, 1 to 100 inclusive, no one has an incentive to change. Good luck. And there is somebody behind the curtain who will analyze all the data, and at the end of my lecture, I will come back and tell you the 2 winners. And then we will email you, and you will tell us your t-shirt size, and we will send it postage paid. That's free stuff, right? Do, 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 do. Bump, 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 bump. My 2 friends in the back corner, you didn't do your phone. Do you not have a phone? Oh, you got it. Okay, so you're commiserating. You probably can cheat on the second one, but the first one's harder cheating on. That's a guess, right? Look around and see what people are going to put in. Second one, you could do a little cheating and say, what do you think the equilibrium is? Maybe we should diversify. We'll split the t-shirt. Because look, that's high stakes, right? That t-shirt is high voltage. Exactly. That's the experimental treatment. Half the time I give this, I do 2/3. The other half, I do 3/2. And then that's my academic paper. Literally a world of difference, doesn't it? 180-degree difference, if you will. He does. But it takes a lot more steps for his students to get to the equilibrium. I only need 2 steps this way, don't I? Reciprocals are powerful. Don't be fooled. If you've seen this before, don't be fooled by the reciprocal. A lot. Where the lower bound, when you have to make so many steps to get there, nobody thinks about it. That's the issue. But this is a lot easier to see the equilibrium, I hope. That's the test in the paper. All right. So if you get the equilibrium wrong, I will take away your econ card. Right? The rest of us, this game's hard. It's hard to think through the equilibrium if you've never played this game. This isn't easy. It's not literally rocket science, but it's close. Right? If you've never seen this game, it's not that intuitive to get to the equilibrium. Everybody good? Okay, now I hope you can put your handhelds away, and now let's talk business. People are walking in late with no t-shirt opportunity. I apologize. Okay, let's talk about the voltage effect. So the reason why I think you've been one of my experimental subjects before is because I could just ask you a few questions, such as, please raise your hand if you've taken an Uber or a Lyft in the last 6 years. Raise your hand, please. Do I even need any more questions? Did everyone raise your hand? Okay, well, I was going to say presidential elections, I was going to say Google, I was going to say Facebook, I was going to say United Airlines, etc. Thank you. You have been one of my experimental subjects. It's not creepy in the sense that I can identify your action with your name. I can't. But I can tell you, if I raise the price of your Lyft by 10% from campus to downtown, I can tell you how you will respond. The world in the last 25 years has literally been my lab. I was a chief economist at Uber for 2 years. I just quit being the chief economist at Lyft for 4. And that's because in 3 weeks, I will start as the chief economist at Walmart. And it will be business as usual. John List using the world as his lab to try to make the world a better place. Okay. So I've given a lot of lectures on my field experiments. And all of you are super smart because you're associated with this institute for sure. In the back of your mind, you might be thinking, well, we've been doing research on poverty eradication for years. Why haven't we solved it? And then you could say the same thing about public education. If you're so good, Why haven't we solved it? Discrimination, same thing. Gender pay gap, same thing. I think it's because from the very beginning, we haven't thought about the problem through the lens of, will that idea scale? We think about it as, I'm going to do an experiment in the Petri dish, and I'm going to use the best inputs because I want to get the best result, the biggest result, so I can publish it and get tenure at the University of Chicago. And then I move on my way. That's the wrong question if you want to truly change the world. And that's what I talk about in the book. When I first started thinking about this area, scaling in large part was art. And what do I mean by that? Fake it till you make it. Anyone ever hear that? That guy's faking it till he's making it, right? Our friend out in Silicon Valley faked it until she made it, and now she's going to be in jail. Elizabeth Holmes. You'll learn about her in chapter 1. Move fast and break things. Throw spaghetti against the wall, and whatever sticks, cook it. That's art. Let's be honest. That is art. There's no science behind those maneuvers or those strategies. Zero science. So if you take nothing from today's lecture, but one thing, this guy is trying to add science to the idea of scaling. You might not like my science. That's fine. Create your own. And I challenge you to create your own. My science is an economic science. That's how I view the world. If you can learn from it, great. If you can't, create your own science. Because we need science in this space. We have too many ideas that are meant for the Petri dish, and when we think about scaling them, they never have a chance. Full stop. Let's talk about my scaling road. How in the world did it take me 25 years, basically, to get to this point to want to work on scaling? How many of you have heard of Chicago Heights? Raise your hand. The city of Chicago Heights. Last time I was there, that was the DMV. DMV is where you go to get your driver's license. And if you know about Chicago Heights, you will know Chicago Heights is a broken community. It was a very, very proud manufacturing city, and all the jobs left. And you have great people there trying to survive. In 2007, they called me. And they called me and said, John, can you help us? Now, if you're a humane human, when somebody reaches out and says we need help, of course, you say yes. So I started working with them in 2007 on their high schools, on public education. Now, for those of you who know, there's Bloom and Bloom Trail down there, at 2 high schools. 1,000 kids enter high school every year, and guess how many make it out with a high school diploma? 480. The other 520 drop out around their 16th birthdays. So we gave it a go. We tried to help those high schoolers around their 16th birthdays to get them over the hump. And we helped some of them. It's great. But the problem with entering a person's life that late is that working with a 15-year-old who's reading at a first grade level, or a 16-year-old who's doing math at a second grade level, that's hard. The system has let them down, as has the family. Let's not just call it a system thing. It's a family and a system thing. It's a society thing. So we turned back the clock. And I told them, I just need a building. If you give me a building to house my program, the Chicago Heights Early Childhood Center, I will raise money and I will start a pre-K for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. They did, that's check. And I ended up, luckily, generating support from Ken and Ann Griffin. Ken is the founder of Citadel, and they gave several $1 million to start this pre-K program. Soup to nuts. Fill out the licenses, get the buses, get the janitors, get the teachers, get the administrators, fill out the federal forms because 95% of my kids are on food stamps. That gives us free milk in the afternoon and gives us free lunches. Soup to nuts. An economist built a pre-K program. 2014 comes, the results begin to arrive. And they are outstanding. Within 5 or 6 months, I can move a kid from Chicago Heights up to Evanston. And you all know Chicago. That's going from roughly the 25th or 30th percentile to the 55th to 60th on COG scores. And on executive function skills, same thing. We wrote academic papers about it. We wanted everyone to learn about CHECK. And if you want the curriculum, I'm giving the curriculum away for free. It's Parent Academy, all-day preschool, everything. It works. So I figured my job's not done here. I've written academic papers, great. I've helped Chicago Heights, great. I want everyone in the world to have my program. That's why we do this, right? You want to change the world. So I started to talk to policymakers. Here comes the problem. John, program looks great. Don't expect it to happen at scale. What? What do you mean? I've been doing field experiments for 25 years in 2014. I started around 1990. So, what are you talking about? It won't scale. Well, it doesn't feel like it has the silver bullet. If all of you are like me, you're probably thinking, what is a silver bullet? What does that mean? And right, which aisle in Walmart can I find the silver bullet? Because I want to change the world. I want to buy a bunch of those. And they said, we're really not sure, but it just doesn't feel like you have it. And by the way, all the experts come in and tell us that their interventions will work. And the ones we try, they never scale. They never work when we scale them. There are a lot of conjectures in that argument now. And I wasn't equipped scientifically to talk about them because I'd never thought about scaling. So that caused me to think about what are we doing as academics? What are we doing in the social sciences in particular to change the world? And I started to think about today's approach. And it's still today's approach, by the way. Okay, here's what it is. Whether it's the government, I worked in the White House for 2 years, back in 2002. I've worked for local and state and other federal governments. I've worked for a lot of firms. Everything I say today applies equally to all of those, including nonprofits. Here's what you do. You do an A/B test. Okay, that's generating data. That's evidence-based policy. And then you might test for heterogeneity. That's not a disease. For all of you who aren't versed in economies, what that is are men and women affected differently by the program? Are different races or different ages or whatever affected differently? That's heterogeneity. That's what we do right now. And then if we get really ambitious, we test for mediation paths. And what that means is, what is my treatment affecting in an intermediate sense that's affecting my final outcome that I care about? You can think about scurvy. You eat an orange, your vitamin C level goes up, it causes you not to get scurvy. That's the mechanism or the mediation path. In economics, if you get the mediation path, then you get a higher publication. Same thing in the social sciences and the medical sciences, right? Think about people eating seaweed and not getting goiter. Same thing, it affects the thyroid gland. That's the mechanism, okay? Now, what I began to think about is, well, shouldn't we be concerned about all that stuff, but also about, will that idea scale? And what is the science behind that idea scaling? We never think about that. And then I started to think, well, if we do contemplate that, would that change the way we do business? We can still do A-B, but would it change the way that we do A-B? And I'm here to tell you, yes. Absolutely. And I think that will really help solve some of the world's greatest problems if we approach this as a policy-based evidence problem. And I'll define what that means in a few slides. But I want you to think about this in your mind, policy-based evidence. Okay. So back up, where did we start? Any good economist will usually write down a bunch of theory. That's where we started. We wrote down a bunch of math, and I'll save you from that. But the actors in any scaling, whether it's government or a firm, you have people with the ideas, you have funders, you have owners of shops, you have politicians, etc. Same story. But all of those people are playing a game. And it's called game theory. It's exactly what all of you just did for me. You put yourself in the shoes of others and you developed an optimal action. That's the solution concept to all of our theory. Okay, it's game theory. Now, you can't just stop with theory. I also began a pretty long trek of looking at DNA evidence. DNA evidence of ideas that scaled and DNA evidence of ideas that failed. Government and business. And I put all of that together and we wrote about 24 academic papers. That's great. But when only 4 people read each paper, that's not a change in the world. I would bet that none of you have read any of my academic papers. In fact, before you came here, you probably Googled me. How many of you Googled me before you came here and said, who's this John List? I'm going to Google him. What did you find? A mass murderer. That's who you found. Let's tell the story like it is. You found John List, murdered his family, was caught by the police in 1989. Right? I'm the most unfortunately named economist in the world. I can thank my parents for that. But it also tells us something about America and what we view mass murderers in relation to economists, right? I just haven't gotten your attention. I can say before the voltage effect, I was 7th on that list. I think I'm 3rd or 4th now. Okay, so the voltage effect has helped a little bit, provide a little bit of voltage. But as a fact, John List was the first person caught by America's Most Wanted, 1989. I can remember because I was an undergrad and I received probably 500 calls that night. Do you know that guy? What's going on? I said, he killed his whole family when I was 5. No way. I know that guy.
Did he get high voltage there?
He didn't, because I don't think in New Jersey they did not have the voltage effect back then. But that's a different story. So I decided to step back and say, I'm going to write a popular book. And I'm going to take a shot at writing a book that everyone can read. And I take out all the math, all the economies, all the Greek symbols, and I try to write it exactly how I'm talking. You'll read it and see this is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make sure truck drivers and everyone else understand. And I say truck drivers because my grandfather, father, and brother were all truck drivers. Okay? That's how I was raised. So let's turn back and say, well, were the policymakers correct, John? They told you that there's going to be a voltage drop. They're right. I would say the first law of scaling is the voltage effect. What happens in the small will, in nearly every case, not happen in the large. Now, the analogy, since we're probably thinking about this from an engineering perspective, is when you scale up, that's the way I think about higher voltage, that enables the idea to move to many people in many different situations. That's how I'm envisioning voltage in the analogy. They were right about that. There's usually always a voltage drop. What about the second question? They said it was a silver bullet problem. Here's where they were exactly wrong. This is not a silver bullet problem. This is the opposite of a silver bullet problem. This is an Anna Karenina problem. Anybody help me with Anna Karenina? Any Tolstoy fans in here? If anybody can recite the first line from Anna Karenina by word, I will send you a free t-shirt. Raise your hand and give it a go. I see the neurons firing right here. You read it in? No. I wish I had. Happy families are all alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That's Tolstoy about Anna Karenina. It's become the Anna K problem in science. You might be thinking, well, what's going on? How's he connecting this? Think about scalable ideas. Scalable ideas are all alike. Each unscalable idea is unscalable in its own way, but my book talks about the 5 reasons why ideas don't scale. Tolstoy has a dimensionality problem because there are an infinite number of reasons why families aren't happy. He has a harder problem than me. Looking at ideas, every one that failed for one or multiple of these 5 vital sign reasons that you'll read about in the book. I haven't come across an idea that hasn't failed. Now remember, let's be clear about what I'm doing here. I'm not talking about execution. I'm talking about features of ideas, signatures of ideas that have the chance to scale. You still need to execute. I'm not into leadership or management. Those are important, but I can't stand up here and tell you I'm an expert. I'm not an expert. But I'm telling you that even though you can be the best manager, the best leader in the world, if your idea has one or multiple of these flaws, it won't scale. I can promise you that. Okay, let's unpack some of those. Number 1, it was simply a false positive. It's shocking how many ideas are scaled that never had voltage to begin with. 50 to 70% of government ideas that are scaled that don't work, they never had the evidence to start. Now, I've written a lot of mathematical papers about replication and that you need 3 or 4 replications for each idea. You'll read about that in the book. But you also have to tell stories in a book like this. And I talk about Nancy Reagan. How many of you have ever heard of the DARE program? Raise your hand if you've heard of DARE. Okay. I lived the DARE program. I was in high school in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, mid-'80s. An agent comes in and says, just say no to drugs. Drugs are going to make your brain shrink, your private parts shrink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Don't use them. I looked at my teacher and I said, I don't see this working. I don't use drugs, but I have a lot of friends who do. I don't think this is going to stop them. And by the way, after hearing all this, I might start to dabble myself. This feels weird. This social inoculation program, this can't be real. Well, John, maybe you're right, but they say they have data. They did have data, actually. I would love to stand up here and tell you that they had a really tiny data set and that they made inference way beyond how they should have. They didn't. They had a great data set. They had 1,777 people in a Honolulu high school go through an A/B test, and it looked like it had voltage. It looked great. But they never bothered to replicate it and see, does it work with another draw in Honolulu, or what about LA or Denver? They took it and ran with it. And Nancy Reagan spent all of her time pushing a program with 0 voltage. Simply a false positive. And it would have been really easy to quickly try to replicate. Now, the DARE program has reached out to me. My book was published February 1st, and roughly February 15th, they called me and said, we want to let you know what we think about chapter 1 in your new book, The Voltage Effect. I said, talk to me. They said, we hate it. I said, am I wrong? Did I write anything that was wrong? They said, no. Everything's correct. Then I said, what's the problem? And they said, well, did you know that the DARE program was still around? I said, yeah, I don't doubt that. And they said, we changed it, and it works now. So I said, okay, send me the data. Let's talk about your data and your experiments. And if I believe it, in edition number 2, I will end chapter 1 saying, guess what? The DARE program has changed, and it works now. And that's a stage where we're at. They're going to send me the data, I hope, soon. Okay, so I can't stand up here and tell you the current DARE program is a false positive, because I don't know. But I can tell you the one that Nancy Reagan spent a lot of her years, and we spent hundreds of millions of dollars on, was a false positive. Now, I don't mean to just pick on government. Same thing happens in private firms. Chrysler reached out to us roughly 15 years ago, and they said our workers have a weight problem. They need to lose weight because of absenteeism and presenteeism. That was their claim. If they lose weight, they're going to be at work more and they'll be more productive. So we worked with them to set up a weight loss program. Now, we did it in one plant, in the Dearborn plant. We got great results. We took it to the CEO. His name was Tom Lasorda. Has anyone ever heard of Tom Lasorda? Raise your hand. Not that Tom Lasorda. That was a baseball manager. He did not double as a Chrysler CEO. This is Tom Lasorda, who was the union boss, and then he moved to Chrysler. He said, this is awesome. Let's give it to all 32 plants. We said, let's wait a second. Let's try it again in Dearborn, and then try 2 new plants. Let's see if it has voltage. Guess what happened? 0, 0, 0 in the 3 new plants. He was devastated. But he would have been much more devastated had we spent Chrysler's millions of dollars to roll it out to everyone and found no result. So we went back to the drawing board and we created a program that did work. And that's what we scaled. In many cases, businesses are just like government. They see something, if they like the shiny object, they go for it. Happens all the time. Vital sign number 2, again, as an economist, I understand incentives. I am going to put question marks there. That's not a typo. That's for you to find in the book. That's chapter 2 in the book. Chapter 3 in the book is chef or the ingredients. Now, this was kind of fun because I looked at a lot of restaurant data. And restaurants are sort of interesting because a lot of restaurants try to scale. A lot of restaurants make it. A lot of restaurants fail. Think about how seductive this is. I have a restaurant, I make $1 million a year. If I had 100 of them, I'd make 100 million. Makes sense. Here's what I'm going to tell you. If the initial success of the restaurant was because of the chef, and the chef is unique, that restaurant will never scale. Why? Unique humans don't scale. If the initial restaurant's success is because of ingredients, and you can replicate those ingredients at scale, you're in business. This is where policy-based evidence comes in. Because most of the time, we go to the Petri dish and we give our idea its best shot. The right sample, the right inputs, we take the best of class. And then we show that it works. That's answering the question of, if you have the best inputs, can your idea work in the Petri dish? That is a question, but it's the wrong question if you're about finding ideas that work at scale. Think about Chicago Heights. I hired 30 good teachers. If I have to hire 30,000 good teachers around Chicago, am I going to find them? If I keep the budget the same? Of course not. I should have tested my program with the types of teachers that I'm going to have to hire at scale. Makes sense, right? Does your idea work with the inputs and the warts and the constraints that you are going to face at scale? Does it work? That's the question we need to ask if we're serious about scaling. We never ask that. We do an efficacy test, we write it up, and then we forget to tell everyone it was an efficacy test. And we move on to our next project. We need policy-based evidence. Will that idea work at scale? That's the question. And I'm not only criticizing the whole literature, I'm criticizing my past self, right? Not serious about changing the world if you don't do that. Let's talk about smart technology within this realm. How many of you have a smart thermostat in your house or dorm or apartment? Please raise your hand. Okay. Those things were advertised to take a big chunk out of the climate change problem. They were advertised as the end-all, be-all for energy conservation for households. So we tested that. Over the last several years, we got a sample of 400,000 California households who all said they want the smart thermostat. We randomly gave the smart thermostat to half of them, and the other half we said, we'll give it to you later. And then we watched and measured their energy use without them knowing it. Guess what we found? How much energy did those 200,000 households save with that technology? 0. Now you should ask, well, wait, didn't you just tell us that the engineers estimated we're going to save a lot of energy? Yes, I did just tell you that, and that's written in several documents. Well, then what happened? The engineers had to make an assumption on who the end users were going to be. And guess what they assumed? That dude. Who's that dude? That's Commander Spock. Half Vulcan, half IIT student slash faculty. That dude never makes mistakes. If you're thinking in the back of your mind, I get it. Once every 7 years, he did make one mistake. If you're a fan of this kind of stuff, that's getting pretty deep in the weeds. He never makes mistakes. Unfortunately, we were selling that product into a bunch of Homer Simpsons. And that's including me, by the way. I have one of these in my home. Here's what I did. Had the person install it. My wife hands me the 28-page manual. I say, forget that. I can do this myself. And I go in and I fiddle with the presets and the defaults. And I completely undo all the good stuff that was in that machine. That's exactly what the 200,000 households did on average. They undid the good stuff. Understand the situation that you're scaling up to. Vital sign number 4. Got a little bit of time, right? 1:32. Oh yeah, 15 or 20 minutes. I'm in pretty good shape here. Good, good. Vital sign number 4. Spillovers or unintended consequences. How many of you in here have heard of Ralph Nader? Raise your hand if you've heard of Ralph Nader. That guy was a change maker, right? Remember his 1965 book? Ralph Nader wrote a book that sold, I think, millions of copies. Bestseller. He complained about a lot of things. One thing was traffic fatalities. He said, too many people are dying on our roads. He said, every automobile should have a safety belt. A lot of young people in the room just looked at me like, how were you cavemen living back then? Very few automobiles in the 60s had safety belts. Because the automobile manufacturers were a super, super clever lobby, and it was expensive. And they didn't think they could pass the cost through to everyone, to the consumers. Consumers were pretty elastic back then. Nader convinced them. So in 1968, every new automobile had to have a seatbelt. Okay. My colleague Sam Peltzman wrote a paper in 1975. He estimated how many lives were saved from that law. Guess what Sam claims in his famous paper? 0. I think he was over-exaggerating because I think there must be some savings. But he estimated 0. Guess why? People started driving more aggressively. And they undid some of the good stuff. It's now known as the Peltzman effect in regulatory circles. So I gave that a spin when I worked in the White House. I worked with the EPA on bicycle safety helmets. And I looked at people who were wearing helmets and people who didn't. There was some Peltzman effect in there. People who had a helmet on drove more aggressively. But I also found something else in those data. Guess what else I found? Automobiles would drive closer to bicyclists who had helmets on. So together, they both undid some of the good stuff. That's one kind of spillover. Those are individual level spillovers. On the other end of the extreme, we can think about market spillovers. And here I want you to think about what happened to me at Uber. Turn back the clock to January 27th of 2017. President Trump issues an executive order. Anyone remember that? It was on immigration. And Americans went wild. The cab drivers around JFK went on strike. They wanted to send a message to Trump and his economic team, and his political team. At Uber, anytime there's a market disruption like that, the rule is to turn off surge. So that's what Uber did. Turned off surge. The cabbies took exception to that. They thought that Uber was trying to break up their strike. So one cabbie tweets, "Here's what I think about Uber," and he ends it with #delete Uber. Anyone remember that #delete Uber campaign? That changed the face of rideshare as we know it. We had Lyft on the mat back then. They were dead. They only had 5% of market share across North America. They were waving the white flag. 7, 8, 9, ready to count them out. When this happened, we lost a bunch of our drivers and a bunch of our riders to Lyft. Lyft now has 35% market share across North America. Okay, but let's not get there yet. Back then, Travis Kalanick, the founder and CEO, came to me and said, "John," my team was called Ubernomics, "John, your job is to get drivers back. Put yourself in my shoes. What do you think the one aspect we could get drivers, the best thing we could give them that would try to get them back? What do you think?" "Cash, pay, something." I said, "Let's introduce tipping." A lot of you might not realize this, but before 2017, there was no tipping in the Uber app. It wasn't Lyft from the beginning. And that's why the drivers wanted it on the Uber app. So I said, let's do tipping. And I fought and fought and fought with the exec team, and I won. In tech, when you win an argument, you earn the right to ship the product. So I got to ship tipping that summer and fall. You can imagine what I did now. I did all kinds of stuff on the presets, all kinds of stuff on getting people to tip. By the way, how many of you tip your Uber and Lyft drivers? Okay, nearly everyone raised their hand. Most of you are lying. And I'm going to tell you why in a few moments, unless you're a special group of people. But we're all special, right? I totally get that. But I'm going to tell you why I think statistically you're lying. We'll get to that in a minute. I digress. Let's go back again to 2017, the summer. So we roll out tipping in Chicago to 5% of the drivers. That's a petri dish. Let's do it with 5% and see what happens. They make more money, they work more. It's a win-win. What do you think happened that fall when we rolled it out to all drivers? They worked more, new drivers came in, so many of them came in that it undid the entire positive wage effect that we were trying to give the market. It came to a new equilibrium. But the new equilibrium was your per hour pay was identical to your per hour pay that we had before tipping. So then we tried to change their wages through rate cards. Rate cards are your time and distance that you get paid. Guess what happens when we did that? Same thing. I also talk about a story on the demand side where I do coupons. Same thing. Market-wide effects are important. And that's another example of them in this chapter. And by the way, I'm going to come back to tipping. And we're going to dig into your brains about tipping. Another kind of spillover we found in Chicago Heights. Chicago Heights was interesting because remember, we put kids in treatment group and control group. And we're not doing a medical trial, right? In a medical trial, if you're in the control group, you're told, here's the pill. It could be the cholesterol pill, or it could be the sugar pill. But you can't go and get other treatment. That's what you sign up for when you do a medical trial. We don't tell people you might be getting a pre-K program, right? We tell them you're not going to get it. You can go out and get other treatment should you want, but you're not going to get it from us. What we find is if your child lives nearby enough treatment kids, it's like they were in treatment themselves. And it works both through the parents and through the children. The executive function skill works through the kids. The cognitive skills work through the parents. That's high voltage at scale now, because we have really cool spillovers in the Petri dish that we can document. Vital sign number 5, I'm going to leave behind the screen, give you an incentive to read the book. But you can look. The first 4 are all on the demand side. In economics, you have demand and supply. That's going to be the supply side. Now, here's what's interesting. When I talk to VCs, talk to startups, talk to firms, they will always start with the supply side. They will always say, does my idea have economies of scale? That's basically what they're saying. Or does it have diseconomies of scale? When I talk to governments, they always talk about the first 4. What are the benefits and who's going to get the benefits? They hardly ever talk about cost, ever. And the reason why is because there's no competition. Our federal government is a monopoly. They don't have to worry about people entering. Firms do. And if you have economies of scale, it's a lot harder for entrants to compete with you when you get down the long run average total cost curve. Okay? Let's talk about second half of the book. And let's do this for about 8 minutes, give me, and then we'll turn it over to questions. Second half of the book, you can view it as after you launch your idea, here's how you can maintain high voltage. But the second half of the book is also, if you're not about ideas at all, and you just want to lead a better life, the last 4 chapters will help you. It's using simple economics to make your world and your decision-making better. So you don't need to be an entrepreneur. This is a way that I have learned about economics and how to teach it. Let's talk about chapter 6. Whenever you hear incentives and think about an economist, you think money, don't you? Chapter 6 is all about non-financial incentives. So let's talk about tipping. All of you raised your hand when I said, do you tip on Uber and Lyft? Here are some facts. Only 1% of people tip on every trip. Let me repeat that. 1 in 100 people tip on every trip. That's a fact. Here's fact number 2. 3 out of 5 people never, ever tip. That's why I said some of you are lying or I have a select group. Guess what happens, though, when I look at yellow cab data? Remember, yellow cab, you flag it down, you take the trip, you settle up face-to-face, whether it's cash or credit card, you pay them, and you make the tip face-to-face. What do you think happens then? 95% of people tip every time. Same people, too. Social norms, social pressure, social image, they matter a lot. I designed the Uber tipping app on purpose because Travis said, I don't want tipping on Uber to be a tax. What he meant was he felt restaurants in yellow cabs were a tax. Regardless of how good the service is at the restaurant, you have to give 10 or 20%. Regardless of the taxi cab performance, you have to give 10 or 20%. That's a tax. He didn't want that. So we separated the decision to tip by space and time. What do I mean by that? You can't tip until the ride is done, you have left the vehicle, and your driver rates you. That's when you're asked to tip. And that's by design. Travis said, John, I don't want more than 10 to 15% of trips tipped. That's exactly what happened. And that's what we beta tested for. This chapter is about the power of non-financial incentives and how you have to use them to scale. Chapter 7, Revolution on the Margins. How many of you have taken Econ 101? Raise your hand if you've taken like an Econ 101 class. Okay. We indoctrinate you by saying economists think on the margins, and the rest of you think the wrong way. And then we give some math, and students walk out saying, I don't know what thinking on the margin means, really. So let's go to what happened at Lyft. So as I mentioned, the last 4 years, I've been the chief economist at Lyft. There's a driver acquisition team at Lyft. Their whole goal is to bring more drivers onto the platform. So they said, John, we want to meet with you. We want to tell you about what we plan to do. Okay. So they started giving me data. Here's the first data point they showed me. They said, John, we spend a lot of money on Facebook ads. And in fact, the last 1,000 drivers we've recruited from Facebook ads, it's been $300 each. That's the cost. Okay. And then they said, we also place Google ads. And the last 1,000 drivers we've gotten from Google, they've cost $400 each. So they said, Logan is giving us money. Logan Green is a founder and CEO, best CEO in the world. He's given us a tranche of dollars, and because of the data, we're going to use Facebook ads. Makes sense, right? That's data-driven decision. Like a lot of you are looking around, not making eye contact with me because you know there's going to be a rabbit that comes out of the hat again. That's thinking in averages. We can all be clear on that. Taking a big clump of data and making a decision. So I asked him a question. I said, what about the last 25 drivers? They said, well, we don't have that. I said, well, send it to me tonight. Okay. Here's what happened on Facebook. The last 25 drivers of those 1,000 drivers, they actually cost $1,000 each, Facebook ads. On Google, the last 25 ended up being half of that. I said, well, Professor List, we get your point. We're not only going to spend the next tranche of dollars on Google ads, we wish we could go back in time and spend the last tranche of dollars on Google rather than Facebook because we would have brought in twice as many drivers with the same budget. That's thinking on the margin. Take a thinner slice of the data when you can. And that's how you make decisions. Marginal thinking. So I talk about that story, and I talk about a story that happened in the White House. Same deal. Nobody thinks on the margin naturally. It's not easy to. Chapter 8, quitting. Now, for all the old schoolers in the room, you may have liked me so far. After you read this chapter, you are going to hate me. You will absolutely hate me. Because I'm here to tell you, we do not quit enough. I was raised in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, in the land of Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi famously said, he was a Green Bay Packers football coach, the Super Bowl trophy has his name on it. He famously quipped, "Winners never quit, and quitters never win." Quitting is probably the most repugnant word in the English language. If you type in quitting in inspirational quotes in Google, you will have enough posters to fill every modern museum in the world. Because those are great quotes, and they're very inspirational. Society has taught us that you don't quit. That's society's problem. Another reason why we don't quit enough is because we ourselves ignore the opportunity cost of time. That's our fault. That's a lot of economies, so let me unpack it for you. I did a big survey on people who have recently quit their jobs. Guess what the number one reason why people have quit? My boss no longer appreciated me. Okay. Number 2, I didn't get the promotion. Okay. Number 3, I didn't get the pay raise. Seems legit. Number 4, I didn't get along with coworkers anymore. Okay. All the way down to 10, I didn't like my cubicle anymore. Every time you ask somebody, they say, my current lot in life got soiled. It's never, my opportunity set got better. The labor market changed, or technology happened, or I got better, so my opportunity set improved, and I moved. Because we don't think that way. We don't think that every day I'm working in this job is one less day I could be working in that one. Or every day I'm living in this apartment is one less day I could live in that one. We should periodically look at our opportunity set. And that should lead us to quit things as often as when our current lot in life gets soiled. That's thinking like an economist. And you can say what you want about economists, that you don't like them, but what I just said makes perfect sense. And that chapter introduces science around it. Steve Levin and I got a big group of people who were ready to quit, but just couldn't make it. We had them flip a coin. If it came up heads, they quit. Came up tails, they stuck with the status quo. And then we followed those people for 6, 9, 12 months. We find the people who quit were much happier. Much, much happier in 6 or 12 months. I have science behind what I'm talking about. If we would just call quitting pivoting or calling an audible, then society wouldn't be so hard on us. Because people view quitting as you're quitting on something and going to lie on the couch and not trying. That's not quitting. Quitting is pivoting. Quitting is calling an audible. Peyton Manning was one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, not because he had a great arm. At the end, he was terrible for the Broncos. My arm was stronger than his at the end. But he was great at calling audibles. He was the best at calling audibles. People didn't say, oh, Peyton Manning, he's rubbish because he always quits. He quit on that play. That's idiotic. He got his team out of a bad play into a better one. He quit one play and he went to another one. Let's be honest about the word quit. And let's get society to start to understand it's a pivot. It's calling an audible. And we need to do more of them. And as soon as we recognize our opportunity cost of time, we will. That's chapter 8. Chapter 9, culture. Now, this was a fun chapter to write because a lot of you might not know this, but I've worked on the gender pay gap and diversity and inclusiveness for 25 years, my field experiments. And the great thing about science is all of these are time-stamped. So you can go back and look at when I did the research because it's time-stamped. A lot of people are entering this area 25 years too late, saying, I want to do this, and I did this and that. The great thing about science is we have timestamps. So this chapter unpacks a lot of why women are paid less than men in labor markets. And I'll tell you what, it starts from the very first ad that an organization places. So let me tell you an experiment that we did back in 2012. So I was starting a firm, and we put out an advertisement, and the advertisement said, wages are negotiable. And then we took that advertisement and used it for a lot of different cities, and we took out that sentence, wages are negotiable. And we had thousands of people apply to both of these jobs. Guess what happens when we say wages are negotiable? Women negotiate as much or more than men do. It's great. Guess what happened when we took out that sentence, wages are negotiable? Women didn't negotiate at all. But a certain kind of man negotiated like mad, the low-quality men. That's science. From the very beginning, how we design our ads affects who you get in the pool and the wage profiles. It's that simple. Let's talk about some swag. Let's talk about some winners. All right. The target was 86. The winner is Yee, Y-I. Congratulations. Give her some love. Tell us what you were thinking when you made that guess, because it's a brilliant guess, a winner. Sometimes luck matters. Luck could be the third law of scaling. You need to have it to win. Congratulations. What's the equilibrium to that game, Nick? N-I-K. Where's Nick? Nick, what's the equilibrium to that game?
Pretty much
100. And guess what? Nick won. Congratulations, Nick. Nick, tell us why 100 is the equilibrium to that game. Give us some intuition, or do you want me to take charge?
I mean, you said, what, there's no incentive to change your number at that point? No? You can't go over 100, can you?
Can't go over 100. What if everyone guesses 50? Why isn't that an equilibrium?
Because there's still 50 more numbers.
If everyone else guesses 50, then you have like a, 1 in 75 chance to win, right? Because you have the same chance as everyone else. But what if everyone else guessed 50 and you guessed 51? That's good stuff, right? Because then you win, because 51's closer to 75. So that's why you know 50 isn't an equilibrium, because somebody wants to change their behavior. Keep that mentality and go all the way up, and where do you have to stop? 100. Nick, you would have liked to say 101, right? Because remember, if everyone says 100, what's the winning number? 150. But you can't say more than 100, remember, because you can only say up to 100. That's why that's an equilibrium. That game was started by a guy named John Maynard Keynes 100 years ago. You saw at the top it said beauty contest game, right? You know what Keynes did? He put pictures of beautiful people in the newspaper back then. And his game was, I want you to guess who everyone else is going to say is the most beautiful. That's why he called it the beauty contest game. Now, he'd get canceled today, I think, if he did that. But he did it because he was modeling stock picking. His argument was, picking stocks is about figuring out, what does everyone else think, not what you think. And that's why it's called the beauty contest game. Okay? So thanks a lot for your attention, and I will take any questions that you have now.
All right, I have a microphone, so you can raise your hand, and I'll hand it to you to ask your question. Do you want?
Now, I was promised that this would be a very, very talkative group. So let's test that hypothesis. Go ahead.
Liad Wagman, quick question. As far as policy, we often don't have the luxury of running experiments. In fact, a lot of the case law in the U.S. is court decided. And the courts don't run experiments, right? They decide a case and they scale it to the whole country often. We see other countries, other unions, like the European Union, deciding policy based on principles, like principle of privacy or principle of big is bad. No experiments whatsoever. So it seems to me that much policy or policymakers don't care too much about being economically efficient. What is your response to that?
So my response is, I agree. When you look at the regulatory setting, I think I have a stat in the book, like 99.8% of all expenditures are done without evidence, with no evidence, not just experimental, non-experimental, with no evidence. That's point number one, and that's culture, because it's how we did it yesterday is how we're going to do it today. You do see the pendulum swinging more in favor of every president puts forward an executive order that says we need to be evidence-based, et cetera, et cetera. And I could see that in the White House when I worked there. I did Bush 2, and I also helped President Obama. There are many cases when there are new dollars or new rulemakings, by law, have to undergo a formal benefit cost test. Okay, so here's an example. There's a rule that every economically significant rulemaking in the U.S. has to undergo a formal benefit cost test. So you can say, well, what's economically significant? It's $150 million in benefits or costs. Those have to undergo a benefit cost. There are about 80 of those every year. And I did a bunch of those when I worked back in the White House. So in those cases, those rulemakings, that's all data-driven. So all of those, you could say, you need to think about scaling. And we didn't do what I'm talking about here. But your general point is correct. John, are there places where we could make gains in government, where we could add data, or are you at the end of the line? So the good news is there are lots of places where we could make big gains. The bad news is there are lots of places where we could make big gains. But I view that as an opportunity rather than, because you can see pockets of it. Think about the benefit cost case that I just talked about. It is all data-driven. We need more places like that. Now, there will be some cases where you just can't get data. It's hard to get data. That's where precedents and theory and maybe interest groups or lobby groups end up having more of a say. I think that's true. In the end, it's always going to be a mixture of all these factors that lead to the decision. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, there's also kind of the dark side of things where you can use data to justify that policy. Right? We see that happen as well.
Yeah, when I worked at the Council of Economic Advisors, 9 out of 10 hours that I worked every day were fighting bad ideas. So you absolutely always have that. But if you have sophisticated people on both sides, the bad ideas do tend to hit the fan. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead. Now I know you were a late entrant. You walked in here a little bit late.
Yeah, I'm so
but you
sorry,
seemed to
John.
dig what I was. You seemed to dig what I was saying.
I was smiling.
I
like
saw
that.
some smile.
Yeah.
Usually it's better than then I know the person doesn't like me. So you seem to like me a little bit.
You're
but go
good,
ahead.
John. You're good. Thank you for coming. So I wanted to know which of you, and you went through all the chapters in your book and the insights that you shared in those chapters. The one that made me laugh the most was quitting is winning.
Yeah.
You know, as you know, we're in the time of the great reshuffle. And so I had a question around how are your insights in this book applied in the real world? Are you providing advice? And where do you see those insights actually having an impact on policies, on organizations?
All the above. Now, usually when you say all, it means none. I literally mean all. When I talk to VCs, when I talk to businesses, like let's say I talk to Anderson and Horowitz, or I talk to Valor Capital, I'm writing a white paper for Andreessen on this. They're one of the bigger VCs out in Silicon Valley. These are new insights to them. When I present the work to people at Walmart or Amazon.com or Google or Facebook or Shopify or Uber or Lyft, these are new insights to them. When I talk to the World Bank, and I'm starting to work with DARPA, so DARPA got really excited about the book, and they reached out to me and said, we want you to be on a panel where we're going to use a voltage effect as a checklist to talk about how we think of allocating the funds, the money that we have. When I present to the World Bank, same thing. The IMF, same thing. I think there are insights in here for every group, and so far, unless they're just being nice to me and they don't want to hurt my feelings, they're saying that come in and help us, and we want to use this as a framework. That's not bragging saying the framework's right. It's saying that it was always art before. How was DARPA deciding on what to invest in and thinking what can scale? It's art. They didn't have a checklist or thinking about, well, number 2 was know your audience. That was what was behind that screen. They don't have a checklist like this. Now, you can say, well, what about the person who just wants to live a good life? That's where I think the back half of the book is helpful. The things on quitting, I think those are relatively novel insights. The things on, excuse me, thinking on the margin, same thing. So I hope it doesn't turn out to be a book that I tried to write for all, but it turned out to be for none. So far, well, 2 months in, 3 months in, so far so good. But we'll see where it goes. We'll see if it has any legs at all. But I think in the end, it will be, like I presented to McKinsey the other day. A bunch of their management consultants really liked it because now they have some principles that they can go in and talk to firms about. So that's a little bit on the dark side, if you will, but
That's good. Can I ask a follow-up question?
sure.
So sticking to quitting is winning.
Yeah.
So what would that look like? Like, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So it's easy to say, John, you're standing up there saying people don't quit enough. But what does that really mean? Here's what it means. I want you to constantly look at your opportunity set, and I want you to compare that to your current situation. And if that is a sure thing and dominates your current situation, I want you to move. A lot of times people quit without having an outside option. I'm not saying that. And I talk about this in chapter 8 of the book about my golf career. The only reason why I went to college was because I wanted to be a golf professional. So I went on a partial golf scholarship to University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. Otherwise, I would have clearly been a truck driver and been proud of it and happy. I went to Stevens Point because I wanted to be a golf pro. But about 3 months in, I realized that's never working. If I wouldn't have had a good outside option, I would have stuck with golf. I would have stuck with it. But I had economics, and I was pretty good at economics. And when people taught me economics, to me, it was all obvious. It's like second nature. People who are good at economics naturally think like an economist. People who have trouble with it have a really hard time thinking like an economist. They don't do it naturally. Because let's think about, when you learn economics, you're learning a new language. It's a lot of math, it's a lot of graphing, and it's a lot of critical thinking skills. It's hard. But my outside option was really good, and I was good at it. It was my comparative advantage. So I always say, whether it's an apartment, a relationship, a job, whatever, make sure your outside option dominates what you have, and when it does, move. That's like a simple rule, right?
It's a great rule for an individual. It's a scary rule for
That's the organization's fault. Make the person's life better then. Give them more wages. I mean, that's not the person's fault. Look, I don't want people sitting in here saying, I'm loyal to Lyft. Let me be clear. I was at Lyft for 4 years. It was super hard for me to call Logan and tell him a month ago that I'm quitting. Super hard. So it's as hard for me as it was for him, I'm sure. He was like, John, we need to keep you. Be loyal. Yeah, be loyal. Great. Give me more opportunities. Give me more money. Well, we can't do that. We're in cost-cutting mode. Okay. No, the advice is always look at your outside options. And guess what? My outside options got better because Walmart called and said, John, we want to give you a sandbox that is 100x what your sandbox is at Lyft. And I have a lot more chances to change the world. This isn't about money. Let's be clear. I make no money at Lyft and no money at Walmart. This is about scientific opportunities. So yeah, you should be loyal, no doubt. But if an opportunity gets so much better, you need to take account of what are the differences. Put in your loyalty wedge, no problem. Our loyalty wedges might each be different. I consider myself a pretty loyal person, but not loyal enough to give up one of the best opportunities in the world to change society. It's too much to give up. So I'm not saying to have a zero loyalty wedge. Have a loyalty wedge. Put that in your calculus, though. When I talk to people who quit their jobs, they didn't say, I quit because my loyalty wedge got really small and the opportunity got really good. They all talk about a very parochial decision setting, which is my current lot in life is soiled. I know that's wrong. 100%. Thanks for your questions. Go ahead, Mr. John Nash. Do you know why I'm calling him John Nash, by the way?
Because I have a beautiful mind.
A beautiful, beautiful mind. Not because you're my dog. So my dog is a miniature Bernedoodle called John Nash. But John Nash is the founder or the father of game theory. So that's why I call him John Nash, because he came up with a Nash equilibrium. Go ahead.
And I learned that actually from Liad's class. So
you're a good teacher, because I can't teach that concept. Nobody gets it when I teach it. Go ahead.
So anyway, I wanted to just really follow up on Mariam's comment. And then,
Sure.
It crystallized something for me. I read most of your book, including the piece about golf, which, I took up golf late in life. And
Is he a big golfer?
And I'm still trying to get better.
You should
better,
quit that dream as soon as you can.
Totally. But so we talk here a lot about mindset and about, thinking about how do we instill the entrepreneurial mindset. Yeah. And what struck me when you talked about that chapter, which didn't, I guess it did strike me when I read it, but there's a difference between economic decision making and psychological and behavioral decision making. Sure, there's that field of behavioral economics, right? You come at it from the economic side. And you have that explanation for it. But the other explanation for that concept, why winners, why people don't quit, is I think I don't know the exact number, maybe you can, maybe you've done field study. How many people have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset? And I would say the majority by far, at least in my, young 70 years of life and experience, like 80% of the people have a fixed mindset.
Absolutely.
And maybe more. And I think that
Absolutely.
Probably explains a little bit
Let me comment
about,
on that. Let me comment on that, because you're right with old people like us, but when you talk to young people, so we do the Carol Dweck type stuff too. When you talk to the younger people, they are more in a growth mindset. And they will still tell you the reasons why I'm quitting are all parochial. So now you can say, okay, how do you show that? We have studies that tweak people's opportunity cost thinking. We have studies that tweak people's growth mindset, whether it's in early childhood or later in their own lives. When you tweak the opportunity cost stuff amongst job keepers, that's the one that gives you the biggest treatment effect. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that stuff is wrong. I am a behavioral economist after all, and I do bring a lot of psychology and sociology and comp sci to my work. You're right that that's part of the explanation, but I don't think that's a big part of the explanation here. And I think the science is on my side so far. I've never heard of anybody saying, I don't have I have a fixed mindset, so I'm going to stick with my job. Or I'm leaving. I'm leaving because I have a growth mindset. Like, they'll never even mention that. I'm leaving because I got angry with my boss. Right? That has nothing to do with mindset. Or I'm leaving because I didn't like my coworker anymore. That's it. Right? It wasn't, I'm seeking better opportunities to grow my mind. That's my point, is that they're not thinking about outside opportunities. But look, your broader point's right. John, to have a cohesive understanding of decision making, you need to not only have economics, but you also need to have some ideas from other social sciences about behaviors. Check. I agree with that. And I think growth mindset is one of those areas too. I agree with that.
All right, that is all the time that we have for Q&A. Can we have one more round of applause? And John has offered to stay after if you want to get your book signed, if you want to ask him about quitting your job, or just ask him whatever question you have.
Here's what I don't. Here's what I don't want. I don't want angry partners calling me, saying, "John, after your lecture, my partner decided to break up with me because they went on the Tinder and they realized their opportunity set is really good." I don't want that. I'm not going to own that. I'm not going to wear that. Okay? I get that we talk about relationships, but I don't want to hear that, all right? All right? I don't want to hear that. I don't want angry partners coming to get me, but I'll be glad to sign anyone's book. I have about 20 minutes, and then I have to take my son to rehab. He just had Tommy John surgery. He's a baseball player.
All right. Thank you all for coming.